First, a word about the Field and Garden Podcast. The Field and Garden Podcast is a part of the Gardener's Workshop. The Gardener's Workshop has been telling the stories and how-tos of growing, selling, and helping others to pursue their flower-growing dreams for over 25 years. What began as one gardening enthusiast sharing her passion has grown into so much more. Over at thegardenersworkshop.com, find in print with our blogs and books and through our podcasts and videos and courses, and we have a shop full of the same tools, seeds, and supplies that you hear mentioned on our podcast. You can connect with all of these resources over at thegardenersworkshop.com. I hope you'll take some time to explore all we have for you. Welcome to the Field and Garden Podcast.
Hi folks, this is Dave Dowling. I'm here filling in for Lisa Ziegler today for the Ask a Flower Farmer Live. And if you don't know who I am, I'm Dave Dowling. I currently work for the Ball Seed and ColorLink as a sales rep, selling all kinds of good cut flower stuff from plugs, seeds, liners, and bare root stuff. I also do the online course with the Gardener's Workshop called Bulbs, Perennials, Woodies, and More. And it's a class you might be interested in taking if you're a cut flower grower or a really serious harm gardener and want to add things like lilies and tulips or hydrangeas and things like that to your cut flower selection, your cut flower varieties. You can always find out more information about any of the classes offered by the Gardener's Workshop at thegardenersworkshop.com. So I'll go ahead now and pick a few of the questions I see here and start answering some. Pebbled Desert Rose, it looks like, is the person. Thrips were on my gladiolus bulbs. Should I dig the bulbs and soak in something? If you're in an area that gets cool weather in the winter, I'm talking not like southern Florida, but like maybe zone 7 or 7B, maybe 6B, gladiolus thrips should not overwinter because the ground gets cold enough to kill them. If you are in an area where you have to dig the glads, you should treat them. Really old-fashioned treatment is the old Lysol that used to come in a brown bottle that you mix with water when your grandmother used to clean the house. That actually kills the thrip that might be overwintering in the bulbs. So if you're either in a warm zone where it doesn't get cold enough for the weather to kill them, or if you're in an area where you have to dig the bulbs, you treat them with a dip with Lysol. You can Google Lysol gladiola and it'll tell you the proportion to use. Your friend is Google and you can find it there. This is the middle of December. There's lots of stuff if you're working on your flower farm that if you haven't done it yet, you should be doing soon, especially things like peonies. If your peonies are finished for the year, you want to make sure that you clean up all the dead foliage and get it out of the farm, off the field, because any disease or insects, but usually disease, powdery mildew, black spot, or botrytis that is on the leaves, you want to get that out of the area where the peonies are grown, cut it off and haul it away. It's usually best not to even compost it, especially if you had problems with the peonies getting botrytis in the past. If you are plagued with peony botrytis every year, which can be as simple as little black spots on the stems or the big black spots on the leaves or even the flowers rotting away, it's recommended that you start treating them with the fungicide as soon as they sprout in the spring. So in early to mid-April, when you've got the little 1-inch sprout, you should be treating with the copper-based fungicide, but every week to 10 days until the buds are showing, and then you can usually stop spraying. That's an important thing with peonies, to have a nice crop the following year to make sure you clean up this year's dead foliage. Another crop to take care of is if you're growing the limelight hydrangea or any of the paniculata hydrangeas, sometime before they sprout in the spring. It doesn't have to be now. You can leave them all winter, just prune it in late winter, early spring. You want to cut them back before they start to leaf out in the spring. If you don't prune your limelight hydrangeas, you end up getting a lot of short stems with small flowers. The flowers are the right size, but usually the stems are too small to use. So you want to prune your hydrangeas. You can cut them back. Most people recommend cutting back like knee-high or waist-high, depending how old the plant is. A newer plant may be knee-high. An older plant you might be waist-high. And eventually you might be cutting it chest-high, depending on how old your plants are. But you want to prune them back. The harder you prune them back, the fewer flowers you'll get, but there'll be longer stems and bigger flowers. So if you have a lot of different limelight hydrangea plants, prune some of them really hard down low and leave some higher up. So you get different sizes of flowers when they do bloom in the later in the summer. With the holiday season, this is when a lot of flower farmers obviously don't have flowers because you grow stuff outside, but you may have a lot of other sales potential in the holiday season. Some of the things you can be doing is selling greens, either just cutting greens from your trees, whether it's cedar or pine or magnolia, and just selling as loose branches, or you can actually make things like wreaths, tree swags, and things like that, or using the greens to make a centerpiece. Last week, Ellen Frost with Local Color Flowers made a holiday arrangement that had no flowers in it. It was all greens and berries and branches, and it looked quite nice. So you don't have to have flowers to have something to make an arrangement with. Here's a question from Desert Rose again. Can you grow bulbs in a 40 to 50 degree range? 40 to 50 degree garage. It depends what bulbs you're growing. 40 to 50 degrees is great for growing tulips and daffodils, hyacinths, but it's not warm enough to grow lilies. Lilies need to have warmer than that. Lilies can be 55 at night and 65 to 70 during the day. But 40 to 50 degrees is fine for what you consider a spring blooming bulb, like the tulips and daffodils. They are going to grow a little bit slower, but they will grow at that temperature. But it's important to know that before you can grow a spring blooming bulb, they have to have the cold vernalization period, which means you've planted them up and keep them someplace cold at close to freezing, even a little bit below freezing in the 30 to 35 degree range for as long as 12 weeks, depending on the type of bulb it is. Because if a bulb does not get enough wintertime cooling or vernalization, they may not bloom at all, or they may bloom really short. Especially tulips, if they don't have enough cooling, they'll bloom at 4 inches tall, which is not tall enough for a cut flower. Another thing that a lot of growers, or cut flower growers that do in the fall time or the holiday season, is to grow amaryllis and paper whites. Both of those can be used as a cut flower, but also sold as a potted plant. What a lot of people do is plant paper whites, and then if you need them as a cut flower, then cut them or sell them as a potted plant. And neither one of those need to be cooled. Like I was mentioning earlier about the daffodils and tulips have to have a cold period. Amaryllis and paper whites are ready to grow as soon as they arrive on your farm or on your property. So you go and plant them up and grow them. One thing to know is that paper whites do like a little bit cooler. If it's too warm, they go really tall and really fast and usually fall over. But the amaryllis, they need it to be warm or they won't grow very fast at all. If you grow them at about 70 degrees 24 hours a day, which means either putting them on a heat mat or even putting them in front of your heat vent or something like that where it's warm, they'll grow much faster. If it's cool at night, say if you have in a heated greenhouse that's only heated at 50 degrees at night and 60 to 65 during the day, those amaryllis are going to grow really slow and may not bloom in time for Christmas. If you're growing amaryllis at 70 degrees 24 hours a day, they can grow 2 or 3 inches a week, and it's amazing how fast they will grow. Here's another question. Let's see what this one is. One way I begin to plant those Christmas flowers for the season. I'm guessing this is a blooming seed, asking about the Christmas flowers I was just talking about, the amaryllis and paper whites. The paper whites are ready in about 4 to 6 weeks, and the amaryllis can be ready in 4 to 6 weeks if they're grown really warm like that. Now, other flowers that you might grow for Christmas season, if you have a heated greenhouse or if you're in an area that's frost-free, like if you're in Southern California or the tropics, somewhere it's not freezing, it depends on what you're growing. But things like a snapdragon, you plant those about 12 weeks before. Stock, again, about 12 weeks before. There's the dianthus, the sweet series, which does not need a cooled period to bloom. So if you plant them, they bloom about 10 to 12 weeks after you plant the plants out. So those are all plants that will work great for the holiday season. The sweet dianthus comes in some great reds and white that are perfect for the Christmas season. And same with the amaryllis and paper whites, so you can get red or pink paper whites. For the stock, you can get the purples. There's the ones they call red, but they're more of a burgundy color. And white is always a good seller in the fall from right after Thanksgiving through the Christmas season, even into January. White flowers with this white stock, white snapdragons, they always sell that time of the year. But you want to be careful. You don't want to plant like orange snapdragons for December and January because it's not a color that people want. You want to make sure when you're planting your flowers, you plant the colors you need to have when they'll be blooming later. Joan Hoover's asking a great question. Can paper white bulbs be used again the next year? And if so, how do I care for the ones that have been forced in water? Paper whites don't really work again to grow them again yourself. If you're in an area that has some mild winters, I'm thinking anywhere from like zone 9 and warmer, you can plant them out in the garden and they'll perennialize and grow out there, but they don't really work for you to save the bulb, whether you grew them in soil or water, to save them and regrow them again next year. It just doesn't work. Lots of people have tried, but it just doesn't work. So you need to buy new bulbs every year unless you're growing in a warmer area where you can grow them as a perennial out in the field. I was mentioning earlier about the greens. There's lots of things that you can grow as a green that can be harvested to sell as the foliage in the fall or the holiday season. Some of the simple ones are Leland cypress is a very fast-growing evergreen, and I wouldn't pretty sure it grows pretty much any zone from like zone 4 to 8 or maybe even 9. And it grows 4 or 5 feet every year. But it's the kind of plant you can hack back and sell it. A lot of stems off the plant, and then it grows back next year to give you lots more the following year. Some of the hollies that don't have pointy needles on them, there's some, I would say, Blue Boy, I think is one. It has a soft point to the needle. It's kind of a bluish green color. And then also the winterberry hollies, the ones with the red berries. There's also some of the orange berries, but those are only for like November sales. The day after the U.S. Thanksgiving, nobody wants orange flowers or berries anymore. They want red and white for the harvesting in the fall for Christmas and holiday sales. There's a blue ice. It's not a cedar. It's actually blue ice. I can't remember what it's called, but if you look up blue ice cedar, it'll come up. It's actually another type of evergreen. It's a really good evergreen because it's a kind of a silvery blue color, but it's not prickly or stiff, and it grows fairly well, and it's a great evergreen to use in Christmas arrangements or making a wreath or things like that in the fall. And again, my name's Dave Dowling, and I do the online class with the Gardener's Workshop called Bulbs, Perennials, Woodies, and More, which is the kind of the class you can take to move your business to the next level, where instead of just growing, annuals like sunflowers and zinnias, you want to add perennials and some bulb crops, like whether it's lilies or gladiolus or tulips, or some of the woody crops like the hydrangeas and winterberry holly and things like that. Because the more things you can offer your customers, whether the customers at a farmer's market or your flower or florist customers you're selling to, the more things you can offer, the more things they'll buy, the more sales you can make, and the more money or more income you'll have for your business. So another thing I want to point out is if you missed the boat and you didn't get your cool season or your cool flowers planted this fall, there's always a second chance to plant them really late winter, very early spring. The trick can be sometimes getting the beds ready for that, because sometimes the weather's not very good. It might be either rainy or just muddy out there to work the ground. But if you have the beds ready, you can direct sow things 6 weeks, 8 weeks before your last spring frost date. And I always like to say seeds are really smart. They know when the weather's right to sprout and grow. So if you put those seeds out there, March 1st, and your last frost date's not until April sometime, or maybe even early May, those seeds can sense the temperature of the soil, the amount of moisture in the soil, and they will sprout at the right time. And you get a much better crop by planting them early like that for the cool season annuals that can take the cool weather than waiting to plant them in May or early June, because they like that cool season start much earlier in the year. So if you missed the cool season planting window back in October or in September, put it on your calendar to do them this spring, in late winter, very early spring. The other thing I like to remind people when you're direct sowing anything, any time of the year, is to make sure you keep the bed watered. You can't put out direct sown seed and wait for it to rain. If you're growing cut flowers as a business, or even as a hobby, you want to make sure that you give those seeds the best chance you can to be successful. So when you direct sow the seeds, you want to water on the day you plant them, and then maybe water every day or every other day until they're up and growing. Because the worst thing you can do is plant the seed, water them, and then walk away and have a 2-week dry spell where the soil dries out, the seed might sprout, and then not survive. So you need to take care of them until they're up and established and growing. 5-seed tulips have had all the cooling they need, so they can be planted right away and grown immediately. They do like to have about a week of cooler growing in the 40-degree range before you actually warm it up to 50 to 55 at night. And she was talking about growing them in water and light. So you do put them if you're growing hydroponically, you can plant them in the water right away. Let them root for a week in the cooler temperatures, the 40-degree range, and then move them into the warmer spot, 50 to 65 during the day. They do need to have the very bright light, either in a greenhouse or if you're going with grow lights, you need usually a lot more grow lights than you think. The fluorescent tubes you use for starting seeds may not be enough for growing tulips. You might need to get some of the real LED grow lights for them. But then after blooming, if it's warm at the 50-degree nights and 60 to 65-degree days, tulips will be ready in about anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks after getting them in that warm area to grow. Joan Hoover is asking, I miss getting some of my iris bulbs planted in the fall. Where and how should I store them until early spring? Your best bet would be to store them someplace cold, so you kind of give them that cold treatment. Cooler or refrigerator at 34 to 35 degrees would be best. The only thing you know that they may dehydrate over the winter in that storage, so they might not do as good as if you had planted them in the fall. My recommendation is if you can still dig a hole in the ground, I would go out and get them planted. Because the sooner you get them in the ground, the better they'll do. Here's something in 9B: with no hard frost but cold nights below 40 degrees from January to March, can you grow peonies? Do the chilling hours have to be consecutive? They don't have to be consecutive. They need to be condensed. In other words, you can have a couple warm days and it's okay. But if you have 2 or 3 weeks of warm weather, those peonies are going to think winter's over and they're going to try and grow. So if you've got from January to March where it's consistently below 40 at night and not getting up to 75 and 80 during the day. So not just the night temperatures, what really matters is the soil temperature. It needs to get down to that 40 degrees. And I'm pretty sure it's 40 degrees for 40 nights. I would have to double check that, but I think it's 40 degrees for 40 nights. Soil temperature, pretty much consecutive. A couple days warmer should be okay, but if you have 2 or 3 days of warm weather, the soil temperature is not going to change much. So if you can get that 40 days of 40 degrees of soil temperature, you should be okay. There are some peonies that do better in warmer areas like that, which would be the Ito peonies, which is the cross between the tree peony and the herbaceous peony. So the Ito or the hybrid peonies, those can sometimes take the warmer winters a little bit better. The other thing I recommend is plant them someplace where they don't get sun on the soil in the winter. So if you have a spot that is shaded in the winter from whether it's a barn or a house, but there is sun there in the spring and summer, that would be a better place than out in the open where the sun starts shining first thing in the morning. Or don't recommend planting them on a south-facing slope because the sun warms that soil better than a north-facing slope. And also don't recommend growing with black landscape fabric because that warms up when the sun shines on it in the winter. So I hope that helps you with your, what I basically call southern peonies, where you're in a warmer area. But 9B is kind of pushing it for peonies. So I wouldn't plant hundreds of them. I would plant 10 or 15 and see how they do, and then decide whether you're going to want to grow more of them. Always get the question this time of the year, is it too late to plant whatever, whether it's peonies or tulips, things that normally are shipped in the fall? I always like to say, as long as you didn't dig the ground, you can still plant. So whether you're planting out a bare root perennial, a potted plant, a tulip bulb, or a bare root peony, or I always like to say, if you go to the garden centers this time of the year, sometimes they have all the half price or $2 plants, and it might be some really great limelight hydrangeas. If you can dig a hole, you can plant that plant. Just dig the hole, get it watered, and you should be fine. Outside Organic Girl is asking, when do you trim back lavender? The important thing with lavender, you never really cut them down really hard like you do with a hydrangea, where you cut them down really low. Normally you would pick the flowers in the midsummer, and then in the fall, anytime before early spring, give them a light haircut, but you never want to cut down where you're leaving just woody stems. You always see some of last year's leaves showing. So it's never a really hard cut. It's more of a shaping and just trimming off any uneven parts. But you never want to trim down so you're only seeing woody branches, because then you're basically going to kill the plant. You have to leave lots of leaves showing after you prune. Hydrangeas can be a great crop if they're happy where they are with good drainage and good summer, warm weather, and good drainage in the winter, because wet feet in the winter can kill them. Oh, here's a really good question. How do you recommend getting rid of bindweed? Bindweed is basically a weed. It's kind of like a morning glory vine. It grows like crazy, makes gazillions of seeds. The biggest thing with any weed is don't let them go to seed. So that means either mowing the area, tilling it, raking it, doing whatever you have to do to kill those weeds so they don't make seeds. But unless you want to use chemicals, like a Roundup, which most people don't want to use, is to prep the bed, tarp it to kill everything that tries to grow. And then when you untarp it, don't disturb the soil. Try and do your planting with as little soil disruption as possible, which means just poke a little hole and plant your plug. Or if you're direct sowing, just dig a little trench and direct sow there, but don't disturb all the soil again. Because when you disturb that soil, you're bringing all the seeds back to the surface. But the biggest thing with any weed is don't let it go to seed, and do whatever you can to keep it from going to seed. Because one plant can put out thousands of seeds, and that's just making it worse and harder every year to take care of the weed problem. And that goes for bindweed, any kind of weed. You got thistle, dandelion, anything. You don't want it to make more seeds that you'll be fighting for years. Trailside Organic Girl wants to know which hydrangeas are the most hardy. Hydrangeas are always a little tricky because there's 2 types of hydrangeas. There's the ones they call sometimes big leaf hydrangea, where it's the macrophyllus, and think of the colors. It's the one sometimes see a potted plant, they're pink or blue or purple. Those bloom on old wood, which means the stem that's there this year has next year's flower buds on it in the fall. If you look at one of those hydrangeas now, there's little buds along the stem, and each one of those have the potential to be a flower. But so many things can go wrong over the winter. It can be frozen really hard and killed, although usually it's not the cold that kills it. It's an early warm spell that causes the bud to break dormancy and start to grow, and then another cold snap after that. So as long as the bud is not growing, it can sit there all winter and get down to 0 degrees and it's fine. But if it sprouts and then freezes again, it's going to kill it off and you lose your flowers for that year. So that's the big leaf or macrophylla hydrangeas that are the colors, the pinks, the purples, and the blues. The paniculata hydrangeas, which is the most common one grown for cut flowers, is PG. It's a PG type called limelight. Those bloom on new wood. So even if the deer eat it, even if your husband mows it down with the mower, it's going to grow back and put up new stems, and each new stem will have a flower at the end of it. So that's the variety that every winter before it grows in the spring, it's best to prune it back to knee-high or waist-high, depending how old the plant is, and you get lots of new growth that gives you more flowers. The limelight hydrangea, a plant that's 4 or 5 years old, can have 100 stems on it easily. Whereas in macrophylla, you're lucky to get 10 stems at the most that are good in a year. So the paniculata PG type variety called limelight is your most productive and the best hydrangea to grow as a cut flower. And the way you prune it can also regulate how big the flowers are. The lower you prune it, gives you fewer stems but bigger flowers. They can be football size or bigger. Prune it a little bit lighter, get more stems, and the flowers may be the size of a softball. If you have more than one plant, I suggest pruning them different heights in the spring so you get different sized flowers to sell in the summer. The other thing is they bloom that white with a little bit of green tint in maybe early August. They're soft and fleshy. They don't last real long as a cut flower. Sometimes you have a wilting problem after you pick them. It's important to remove almost every leaf so all the water going up the stem goes to the flower and not to the leaves. But then also it's even better to leave them on the plant until they start to age a little bit in late August, early September. They turn that pinky rosy color with a little green tint. And they change the feel. They feel like paper then. Those will dry right in the vase. So you can sell them to your customers, sell them to your florist, and you know they will never wilt. They're going to dry right in the vase and last people for a year. So I always like to resist selling them as a fresh flower and sell them later on as a dryable flower when they're going to last longer in the vase for the customer. But as far as the hardiest one, hardy as far as cold tolerance, the macrophylla, the big leaf, they can take it cold. They grow out on Martha's Vineyard in the middle of the ocean where it can send to 0 degrees in the winter. But what happens out there is they have a long, cool, slow spring. They rarely get that hot spell in April when it's 90 degrees, then a hard freeze 2 weeks later. So they don't get that kind of rapid changes in temperature in the spring. So they do wonderful out there. Along the coast, they're fine. It's more inland where you might get a warm spell. Early March, it's 70 degrees. They start to grow, and then it freezes really hard afterwards, and it kills off those buds. And even if that happened with the limelight hydrangeas, PG type, they would still put out new stems and still flower that year. So I'll call it a day. I think Lisa will be back to do the Ask a Flower Farmer Live next week on the Gardener's Workshop. Thanks y'all for joining, and I'll see you next time I'm here as a guest. Have a great day.